to HCM TradeSeal. This is a tutorial video for users of TradeSeal Basic Edition. And Basic Edition is ideal for companies with anywhere from about 10 to 100 employees and multiple certified payroll jobs. So in this video, we'll walk through all data setup, employees, rate and benefit rules for both prevailing wage and union examples. Jobs are probably where we'll start because it's a good baseline for certified payroll. We'll talk about data upload and download. We'll talk about adding API connections once you've proven your data all line up. We'll talk about reviewing hours and rate validation before you create reports or even connect it to your payroll. And we will talk about creating reports such as certified payroll or union reports and other settings as well. So we'll walk through a complete example. We will imagine a fictitious company called Benton Valley Electric. If you have higher editions of HCM TradeSeal, you can select multiple companies, but most basic edition users are just choosing one company. So we're going to stick with Benton Valley Electric. Okay, so let's start by understanding the jobs that our company will have. In a separate video, if you want to look at HCM TradeSeal Starter Edition, we'll go through entering jobs one by one. But for Basic Edition, we're assuming you may have multiple jobs. So while it's certainly possible to click Add Job, enter the job number and other data by hand, it's easier to upload the jobs. So we'll go to some data that we've prepared. If you ever want to know more about data, use the TradeSeal Knowledge Center, and you can look at data imports and templates. You can learn about lots of different upload formats, including jobs and others we'll go through today. But for today, what we're going to do is look at a fully filled template. So I'll go back to jobs and I'm going to upload some jobs. I will go to source upload, click data files from computer, and I'm going to import my jobs. Now, in order to do this, I've prepared some data. And let's talk a little bit about these data. I'll make these bigger and I'll also expand my columns. So these are some example jobs that we're going to imagine for Benton Valley Electric. We've got job numbers, names, addresses. We're imagining that they're all going to be in Florida. We've got different counties, project numbers. So we'll walk through what these fields do in TradeSeal, but probably the most important concepts are going to be job number, address, name. These will go on certified reports, and this reporting CP column. So to illustrate, we've added some non-certified payroll jobs. It's kind of nice to just have all your jobs in there, but the ones that will be most important are marked CP, certified payroll. And these jobs won't be relevant today. These are an advanced concept if you use TradeSeal for SCA, Service Contract Act, that behaves a bit differently. But most of our users are focused on certified payroll jobs. So this is a good look at the job data. What I'm going to do is go back to TradeSeal in the source upload screen. I'm going to upload my jobs. There they are. And hit submit. So in Data Manager, if I click on jobs, there they are. And what I'm going to focus on a lot in this demo are these two certified payroll jobs. Okay, so jobs are set up. Now I'm going to move to employees. So the question is, what employees do we have in our whole company, not just on certified jobs? Because usually if you've made it to where you're doing this for more than maybe just 10 or 20 employees, you're going to want the benefit of automatically determining who's prevailing wage, who should get on a report. So it's better to just load in all of your employees. You can certainly enter them by hand, but in this video, we're going to upload them. So we've prepared an upload for that as well. So I will go to the source upload screen. I will pick employees. We'll start by showing what it's like to import employees with no employer paid fringe credit benefits. And then later we'll come back to fringe credits. So I would upload employees. Now, before I do, I'm going to walk through the employee data with no employer paid fringe credits. This will just be simple data. So for each employee, I have a date. People often ask about the date column in TradeSeal. This is intended to be sort of an as of date or effective date of changes. There's a separate column for hire date. In my example, they're the same because these are all brand new employees I'm loading into the system. As you continue to use TradeSeal, hire date would usually stay the same for most employees, and date will be updated when you have changes such as a address change, rate increase, any employee change. So for now, it's all the same. I've got an employee ID. I've got an employee name. And you'll also have demographic fields like gender, ethnicity, but for demonstration purposes, we kept this pretty minimal. We've got a last four of SSN, a base rate of pay. A common question for basic edition users: what does base rate mean? It means their default rate of pay, separate of prevailing wages or unions, just their normal rate of pay as an hourly employee. Union, if they are a union employee, you would put their home union code. It doesn't have to be a full setup, just the code of their union. Department is mostly for visualization, and it makes it easier to understand them. It doesn't really change anything in TradeSeal. A useful convention is to call people hourly if you just intend them to be simple hourly, not necessarily union, not necessarily prevailing wage. PW eligible is a useful concept. Some of our customers like to differentiate between regular hourly versus hourly who may work prevailing wage. You don't need to do this, but it can be useful. And union is a good so-called department for employees in a union. But again, this is an optional field. It's mostly to make it easier to search. It's visually nice to see. And position is an important concept in TradeSeal. I've intentionally left position blank for a lot of employees because some of our basic edition users are new to tracking job number and position the way that prevailing wage or union work mandates. So it's okay to start up with position blank. But what you'll notice later in this video is that we have position at the time card level, and it can become very important for prevailing wage, certified payroll, and union work. And last but not least, we have a pay type, hourly or salary. And that will help us differentiate. This is important if you are going to have salary people in TradeSeal. It's completely fine to just leave salary people out of TradeSeal. But if you are going to put them in, you would want to note their pay type being salary. So that's a quick overview of employee data. Adding the employees will be pretty straightforward. I just upload them. A common question people ask us, well, isn't this going to be an API connection? Absolutely. Later in this video, we'll talk through how to retrieve the employees with an API connection. But typically, your TradeSeal team will recommend you do this first, because if you can't prove the data points in a file, they are unlikely to work with an API. So we'll pick basic employees. These employees do not yet have fringe credits, so we're going to skip that, and we're going to upload them. Great. So here are the employees in Data Manager. We just reviewed them in Excel, but now they've all cleanly uploaded to TradeSeal. So moving on, I have jobs, I have employees. This would already allow me to start trying TradeSeal if I wanted to. I could key in hours, but most users are just going to look at this data and say, yes, I have my jobs, I have my employees, but now what, right? So I could enter hours to jobs for someone like Paul. So I can go look for Paul. I think Paul Johnson is an example employee that I use a lot. And I could give Paul 8 hours on one of my jobs. Let's go with the Tampa job, and we'll even have Paul work. Oh, no positions. I haven't set up any rate rules yet. So I'm going to just start by trying this out to see what I can do so far. And that worked. So I'm already able to log hours for Paul, but something is missing, right? I don't see any rate or benefit rules. I'm not quite ready to make a certified report for this yet, but early proof of concept. This is what you can do if you have jobs and employees. This is covered in more depth in the starter edition tutorial if you want to look at using TradeSeal without any additional rules, but most basic edition users will want to add more configuration. So let's come back to data setup. The next thing I want to do is add rate and benefit rules. So for simplicity, we're going to talk about rates and benefits for prevailing wage, and then we'll come back and talk about them for unions as well. So let's start with prevailing wage. One thing I could certainly do, and you'll see this in the starter edition tutorial, I could just confirm my prevailing wages manually. If I already have a wage determination or a trusted total prevailing wage, I could certainly use that. If desired, I can also open up Wage Finder, HCM TradeSeal's prevailing wage database. And for my example job, let's go back to the example. This is an example job. It looks like a Tampa municipal water pump. As a best practice, I've entered in the county. And in this example video, we're going to imagine that I have electricians, possibly laborers working on this job. So I may already have this, but if the wages I'm working with are stale, maybe I haven't checked them in a while, that's when I would open up Wage Finder. So I'll type electrician and I'll put Hillsborough. Okay, and I'll go with highway. So for example, I could have a total prevailing wage of $27, $24 rate, $3.53 fringes. So you'll often have this information already, but it may be useful to look it up. So once you've done that, now in my example, I may not use this exact wage, but I wanted to demonstrate total prevailing wage versus rate fringes. So going back into setting up my rates, I want to put the rate portion only in rate rules, and I want to put the fringe benefit portion only in fringe benefit rules, and these are for the job. So I'm going to walk through doing this only for jobs. These are not going to be employer paid fringes. This will not be employee specific. This is only for the job. So when I'm trying to add to TradeSeal are prevailing wage rules for this job, for electricians, and possibly other classes, and I want them to match my wage determination. So let's look at the rates only. Make this larger. We'll zoom in a little bit. And we'll expand columns. I can add start and end dates to rates later, but for now I'm just going to focus on the basics. So in job number, this is a very important concept for prevailing wage. I want this job number to match pretty much all records for that job in my system. When employees record time, it should match this job number. In fact, I'll go back to my jobs table for just a moment. You can see that this job number matches 26002P is what I've chosen to call it. It does match. So job number is important. And this field, position class, you may have this already set up in your time and attendance system. You may still be deciding how to do this at your organization, but it's important for this to be consistent as well. So when an employee works prevailing wage, probably in general, you want to track this on your jobs, but especially when someone works prevailing wage, you want to know what job did they work on and what did they do? How are they classified? Labor, electrician, so on and so forth. So in this example, it looks like I have a higher prevailing wage than I saw in Wage Finder, but that's okay. This is just a demonstration. So I'm going to keep my prevailing wage here at $28.50. I'm going to write electrician. And I'm going to have a note about what type of work this means at my company. And to stay focused on that, that's going to be my prevailing wage rate of pay. Okay, it looks like I have prevailing wage data. It's higher than the data I saw in Wage Finder, but this is just a tutorial, so I'm going to stick with this example. So I've got 28.50 for my electrician. Let's go ahead and upload these rates. So I can go to the data manager and click upload. This will take me to the source upload screen. I'll pick rates, and I'm going to take that rates file and I'll hit submit. And it looks like they all uploaded. They're in a slightly different order than my file, but they're clearly still here. If I want to, I can focus only on this job, 26002. Didn't bother to type the P because this is just a search filter. Looks like these all made it in here. So in my example data, I entered multiple classifications of work, positions, I should say, but I'm going to stay focused on this electrician. So half of my work is done for rate setup. I have all the prevailing wage rate portions. That's good. So what about fringe benefits? Let's take a look at fringe benefit data for prevailing wage. We'll come back to unions in a moment. Okay, so for prevailing wage data, most of the time I'll be focused on a prevailing wage fringe. Name is just visual for me. When I'm reviewing my data in TradeSeal, I'd like to call this the PW fringe. Code, I might want to make this match my payroll system. Many TradeSeal users in Basic Edition use TradeSeal as part of their payroll. They use it to pre-calculate prevailing wages. You don't have to do this, but as a best practice, you may want to use your payroll system earning code for prevailing wage fringe or prevailing wage cash in lieu, as it's often called. It's an earning. You can add start and end dates if you need to. I won't cover that in this tutorial. And skipping ahead, here again is job number. We want this to match other job number data points in TradeSeal. So we've got the same job number. Here's electrician. So I want this to match. If I have a rate for electrician, I want a fringe for electrician. This is important. As I mentioned, the prevailing wage fringe is an earning. It is a payroll earning. It's called cash in lieu, but typically these days it's not cash. It's a payroll system earning paid to the employee. Use the calculation method PW fringe. In TradeSeal, benefits can have different calculation methods. And for the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage fringe, so most of the time we want to use PW fringe. This could vary if you have state-specific prevailing wages, but most of the time you'll use PW fringe. In this example, I've gone higher than the wage determination I saw in Wage Finder, but for this example, we're going to pay the electrician $10 an hour and 5 cents PW fringe portion. Common question I get about prevailing wage fringe: is the prevailing wage fringe a fringe credit? No, it's not. Fringe credits are different and they can affect the prevailing wage fringe, but I'll set this to no or leave it blank. And for a note, I'm calling this the fringe portion of the electrician. And that's it. There's many other fields, but I've covered the most important ones. So let's go back to TradeSeal and we'll upload the benefits. So I'll choose that benefit file from my computer, hit submit, and now I'll see the benefits. So I already got my rate for this job for the electrician. Now I've got the benefits. So we'll go back to that filter, 26002, and I'll type the P this time. Electrician, I'm going to pay him 28 bucks an hour for this wage determination. And also for the electrician, here we are, $10. So if I have, let's see, 28 plus 10, I'm expecting a total wage of about $38 in this example. Okay, so I have rate rules for prevailing wage. I have fringe benefit rules for prevailing wage. So before we get into any additional setup, we won't talk about unions yet or fringe credits yet. Let's see these rules in action. I'm going to go to rate validation and review this employee, Paul Johnson. We gave Paul hours on the prevailing wage job, but I haven't seen this work yet. And before I upload a lot of hours, before I try to really configure this, hook it up to my time system, I'd really like to see this work. So I'm going to click on Paul, and I've got the hours. And what I'm missing, which is critical for prevailing wage, is a position. But now that I have some rate rules, TradeSeal is going to recommend positions. So since I am keying in, obviously I'll want to upload this from a time system if it's lots of people. But if I'm going to key this in, that's fine. I'm going to pick electrician. So now I've got job number, electrician, still just 8 hours on Monday. That's fine. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to go back to rate validation to see the output. And this is looking more like TradeSeal prevailing wage calculations. So what I've been able to demonstrate is that I have a job, I have an employee, I now have rate and benefit rules, and I can put them all together in an overview of prevailing wage. So just as I predicted, the total prevailing wage is $38.55. That's close to what I guessed. The prevailing wage rate is 28. The prevailing wage benefits are 10. And so these are all the elements I need. In payroll, I would expect this employee to receive $28.50 an hour and then a lump sum of all their cash in lieu. Some users do this a bit differently. It's okay to just pay $38 an hour instead. But in general, this is the most ideal way to break it out on a prevailing wage pay stub. So I've explored how TradeSeal is calculating it. I'm not ready to do anything with this yet, but at least I've seen it work. Okay, so before we continue with prevailing wages, certified payroll, let's also look at what would happen if we wanted to add a union. So we'll go back to Data Manager. We've already covered upload and download. Let's just focus on union pay rates. So we're going to look at an example union, IBEW 123, an electrical union. So we'll filter. This can all be uploaded, downloaded in Excel, but since we've already covered that in the tutorial, we are going to just look at the data. So I've uploaded a union rate schedule, union rate structure. In the prevailing wage section, we went to Wage Finder to look at prevailing wage rates. For unions, you're typically going to get this from a union rate sheet. So a typical union setup would be union number. It's important for this to match employees. Position, class. So unions are more class oriented. They're all electricians in this example. It's a little simplified, but in our union, we're going to assume they're all electricians, but they're going to move through being apprentice level 1, 2, 3, 4, journeyman, and foreman. So these are not exact rates, but they illustrate a common union structure. And separate of these rates of pay, we also have to have fringes. So just like prevailing wage, the rates and fringes are separate. So for a union employee, we're going to look at each fringe benefit. Health and welfare is a pretty common benefit. We've chosen type info because it's employer paid. So info in TradeSeal means employer paid. It's not an earning. It does not get paid in payroll. It's not a deduction. It does not come out of their pay. It's informational. Some payroll systems call that a memo, but that is a union benefit. It's employer paid. It's informational on pay stubs. In this example, it's an hours worked, which means for each hour they work, they get $3.25 contributed to that fund. So moving on, we've also added a pension fund. It's informational. It's an hours worked calculation. $2.10. We've added 2 rows for annuity. The reason for this, in some union locals, you'll see that the journeyman and foreman rate for a benefit is different. You may see cases where apprentices get a benefit or a deduction that they have to pay and journeymen don't. So this is just illustrating that example. So here we have an annuity. If you're apprentice level, I can put multiple classes on one line, which will save me some space in my data. So for apprentices, it looks like they get 75 cents an hour in their annuity. And in this example, journeyman foreman, $1.75 an hour. TradeSeal will handle and calculate that. For apprenticeship and training, it looks like I have another employer paid. It looks like that's also hours worked. In some unions, you will see differences. You'll see, you can look up full calc method definitions in TradeSeal Knowledge Center, but an easy way to view them, there's many to choose from. So you may see percent pay total. Hours paid is a common union calculation. Where's hours paid? Here you go. Hours paid would mean it gets multiplied differently for overtime, but we're sticking with hours worked in this example. There's many calculation methods, but this particular local is all hours worked. Finally, I have a deduction, union dues. This one looks like it's a percent. So it says union dues, pay total. That's a percent-based calculation. It's going to be 2%. TradeSeal will calculate that. And it looks like we have one more employer paid, the industry fund, 25 cents an hour. Last but not least, in some cases, if I'm worried about union benefits colliding with prevailing wages, I may want to set some of these up as a fringe credit, but I won't cover that in this tutorial because it's not very common. Most TradeSeal Basic Edition users have either union pay scales or prevailing wage. They usually don't collide. So we've covered union setup, rates, and benefits. So let's take a look at a union employee. Let's see if we can find someone in IBEW 123. Looks like we have many to choose from. So we'll pick this first employee right here, 10031. And they've got a rate of pay. Base rate for unions, something useful to understand. If you want to do this all for union scale, some Basic Edition users set base rate to 1 penny or 0 to say, hey, I don't want TradeSeal to think about their base rate. The reason is, by default, if this person has a higher base rate, then to prevent payroll issues, it'll always pay them the highest. It'll pay them this even above scale if I want to, but I won't do that in this example. So I've got my union employee. This person is a foreman. That's good. So I've got a foreman, and we'll enter in some hours for this employee. So back to my hours example. I'm going to take Paul, who worked on this job. Paul's non-union. But let's go back to that union employee. We'll give them 8 hours on Monday as well. So they're a foreman. Their rate is 33. I really shouldn't have to enter their position because TradeSeal already knows they're a foreman in this case. I'm going to have them work on the same job. And that's it. Let's see what I get. So this will be a bit different. In this case, I'm not really expecting any prevailing wage calculations because it's very common for union to just be separate. So if union is paid the same or higher than prevailing wage, you don't really have to worry about having it cross-index prevailing wage. So I've got a union employee here, and I've got their union number, and I've got their job number, same job in this example. They happen to be a foreman. So how do I understand if they're being paid correctly? I see a rate match. It looks like it did find a matching rule, union in this case. And the fringes look correct. This is what I was expecting to see for this union. And it's showing me the hourly amount as well as the total lump sum benefits. And for rate, I'm able to understand, it looks like in this case, the union rate didn't make a difference because I already have this employee set up to earn $33.25. And that was also the union rate, $33.25. So that looks pretty good. That's what I would expect for a union employee. Notice how my data points all align. So I've got the same union code. I've got a position that lines up and my rate rules and my time card. Job number lined up as well. This will help me when I'm doing certified, but in this case, the job number did not make a difference in this employee's pay. They're just union scale. Unlike the prior example of the prevailing wage employee, where the job number made a really big difference in the way they were paid. So let's back up. Let's take a look at what we've accomplished so far in this tutorial. We set up job rules. We took a look at prevailing wages. I didn't end up using it. I used a different example wage, but this is a way to check wage scale. I set up a union using data. For some customers, if you go live with TradeSeal and get to more of an ongoing use, you can take advantage of our AI union setup feature to make that process easier. But in this tutorial, we just covered setting up the union manually and uploading the data. And the result of all this data setup is I have employees, some are union, some are non-union. I have rates for both prevailing wage and union examples. I have benefits for both prevailing wage and union examples. And I have my job structure where today I chose to enter a combination of non-certified payroll jobs, certified payroll jobs, and a few that we'll disregard for today that have more to do with the Service Contract Act. So finally, I'm ready to go a little bit farther. I have jobs, rates, earnings deductions, fringe benefits, employees all set up. And now I'd like to see if I can import some hours instead of entering them by hand. So I hand entered a few just to see if my data match up. It looked pretty good. So I'm going to go to those time cards and I'm going to get rid of them. I don't need them anymore. So this is a manual entry. I'm going to just clean up these data. And I'm going to come back. All my data here are fine, but if I go to rate validation, I'll notice that there's no hours. So now I'd like to talk about importing hours from a time system. So to import my hours, I would go to source upload, hours from time system, and I'll select files to upload. So let's take a look at a fully filled example file. If you do have questions about hours, you can look at TradeSeal Knowledge Center. But for today, I've got fully filled example data. So we'll zoom in just a little bit and take a look. All right, I've got a fair amount of data here. So some of my employees in this time file are hourly. I'm not expecting them to work on prevailing wage. Some of my employees do work on prevailing wage, so I'm expecting to see a position for those prevailing wage hours. And some are likely union, so I will see them get union scale. I just won't have to actually do anything because TradeSeal already knows they're union. So let's focus on the fields that are going to be really important in my hours data. So regardless of the time system you're using, and regardless of whether you're planning to use API connections, at some point with your TradeSeal team, as you're setting this up, you'll want to make sure that your data line up. So let's walk through this example time data. We have employee ID, which of course should match the employee IDs in your TradeSeal data manager. Employee name is not required, but it is convenient. If you can get your time and attendance system to show the name, it makes it easier to look at these files when you need to. In day-to-day use, you won't need to. You'll just upload them, but it's useful to see the name. Job number, of course, is important. It needs to line up with any rate and benefit rules for jobs. And also, if you want certified payroll reporting, this would have to match the job number in your certified payroll reports. Pay component just means type of hours. So it could be reg, OT. TradeSeal can be configured. So if you want to say regular instead of reg, or if you just use a number, like let's suppose that you call regular code 1, that can be configured in TradeSeal, but in our example, we're going with our preferred pay components or earning codes. So I've got reg and OT. I can have other ones like holiday, PTO, but I'm going to stick to just regular and OT in this tutorial. Number of hours. For those not familiar with prevailing wage, you may be wondering, why doesn't this just say 40 hours a week? It's very important to break the hours by day when you're dealing with prevailing wage or union employees. So you'll notice that for hourly employees, I have dates 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. That's a whole week of work. The dates are critical for certified payroll reporting. Shift is optional. It won't be covered in this tutorial, but this can help if we need to do shift rates, shift pay. Union number override. This also will not be covered in today's tutorial, but you can override the local union for the employee. Rate override also won't be covered in this tutorial, but it's useful for overriding the rate of pay if you need to. Position override is important because if they work prevailing wage, we do need to understand what position they are considered for that job. In fact, it's a best practice to always use position. You don't need to, but JM, FM, electrician, or even just shop admin, it's useful to know 2 data points, what job and what type of work. So think of job number and position as extremely important fields in TradeSeal. They're just not technically required from a data standpoint. You can add a considerable amount of cost codes. This is just for illustration purposes. You can add many levels. You can do cost code 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So if I do want costing, I can upload cost codes. Direct pay is more like bonus salary, not very common on time cards, but you can upload it. Expense, if you have things like per diem, those can also be uploaded at the time card level. And notes. Occasionally it's useful to have notes, but for today's tutorial, we're going to stick to the simple data points. The most common are job number, position, date, number of hours, and pay component reg or OT. Going to give us the most realistic example. So we're pretty much ready to upload these data. And so to upload the data, we will return to source upload, choose, or I'll go back. Choose hours from time system. I'm going to select that file. Hit submit. So let's take a look. Here are the hours. So we'll walk through an example of what I would look for to confirm my hours uploaded as expected. TradeSeal customers use this rate validation screen sometimes just to check hours. Others use it as a pre-payroll process. So there's a lot of things we can do with the rate validation screen, but something most TradeSeal customers will want to do after importing hours is confirm that they import it as expected. So I've got several employee hours in my upload that have nothing to do with prevailing wage or certified payroll or unions, and that's okay. The reason I would want these hours in TradeSeal is you never know when a job will be reclassified as prevailing wage, or later you may find that someone was supposed to be union or there's a data error. And for those using TradeSeal as a part of the payroll process, it's useful to just have all the employees anyway, so you get a simple import, validate, payroll. So this is why I have many employees in my data that are not union or prevailing wage. There's also going to be times like this employee right here, example employee Paul. Some employers are going to work non-prevailing and prevailing wage hours in the same week. Very useful to have all the hours so that I can confirm I have the whole story of that employee. So let's take a closer look. I've set up jobs, rates, benefits. So if I correctly track the employee on the job, I have a position, I should be able to see prevailing wage calculations. In this case, Paul is owed a total of $38.55. The rate portion is 28. The fringe portion is about 10. There's no employer paid benefits yet for this employee. And then I will look for a union example. These are union employees. So they're not going to get a prevailing wage match. In this example, I'm just assuming union scale is higher than prevailing wage. So I'm not going to, there's advanced ways to set up TradeSeal to consider both. But in this example, I'm just going to keep it simple. So this employee, I just look for their union pay, union benefits, looks pretty good. So if I was using Basic Edition HCM TradeSeal as part of my pre-payroll process, I would then expect to upload these data to my payroll system. Depending on your edition with TradeSeal, it's possible to have this be an API connection as well. But for today, I'm just going to review, and some users do not like to use the upload option. They have a different way of figuring this in payroll. So regardless of how you're using TradeSeal Basic Edition, it's still useful to review all the hours and all the calculations and confirm that the data import is expected. So we are almost ready to take a look at generating reports, but let's come back and do a quick review of everything accomplished in this tutorial so far. We added our jobs, we checked prevailing wages, we set up unions, we have multiple employees, 63 in this example. We have prevailing wage and union rates, earnings deductions, and fringe benefits. We have our jobs. So with all these data, we did complete one more step. We imported the hours, and the result is we have a full week of hours data. So this is everything that we need to generate reports. There's two types of reports that we can generate so far. We only have 1 week of data, but it's enough to demonstrate certified payroll and union reports. Okay, so to generate a certified payroll report, I'll come to the generate reports screen. I will choose a federal report in this case because it's the most popular certified payroll report. I'll choose my work week, which was, I think it was this week. I guess I should double check that. Okay, I need to double check my week. Yes, it is the week ending January 10th. So I will pick federal. I'll pick week ending January 10th. I would like to upload a payroll journal of check stubs. That won't be covered in this tutorial. It's completely fine to generate a proof certified payroll report without these data. The reason we often don't set up these data at first in TradeSeal Basic Edition and other product editions of TradeSeal is that you usually can't get pay stubs until you've made it a little farther in your setup. So we'll go ahead and generate the report without payroll journal pay stubs. That's completely fine. I'm going to see basically 80% of the report filled out without a payroll journal. I'm going to enter a payroll number for this run. So I'm going to say this is my payroll number 3. And I'm going to choose the latest version of this report. That's everything I need. So I'm going to hit generate, and it's going to go through all my data and look only at employees who worked on the certified payroll jobs, whether they are non-union or union employees. It's going to get them all. In this case, it gave me a data quality warning because, as I mentioned, we don't have payroll journals yet, and that's okay. So it's warning me that it couldn't find pay stubs, but for this tutorial, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to take a look at my report. So when I hit download, I will get a zip file. Okay, my zip file has downloaded. And a zip file is a way of downloading a whole folder of information. So in this case, I have 2 certified payroll jobs that had hours. So I'm going to have 2 fully filled reports. And I've got an additional file for job number 2. In this example, I'm calling this the Tampa job. So we'll walk through why is there an additional Excel file for this job. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at my biggest job. It looks like I have a lot of workers on this job, and I've got multiple rows for the workers. So even though I'm not 100% done setting up my TradeSeal, I've got a lot of really nice data in here already, and this is way better than filling out the report by hand. There's a few settings I can change in TradeSeal. So this says prime contractor. If I'm a sub, I suppose I could just check this box. But this can be set up in TradeSeal. And it's got all the project information. This comes from the jobs table in TradeSeal. Just for a moment in this tutorial, I will go back to the jobs so it's easier to follow. So to review, this is my Tampa job. Most of the information I'm seeing in the report at the top is coming from this table. And as a reminder, we've set the reporting to CP to make sure we get the job. Here's my project number. Okay, so let's go back. All these data have been filled for me. TradeSeal filled in my work week. I'll zoom in just a little bit. If your work week starts on a Monday, for example, this can be adjusted as a setting. In this tutorial, I'm keeping it as Sunday through Saturday. It's placed all of the hours only on this job into the correct boxes for me. Occasionally, you will have employees who get different rates of pay. So Paul Johnson has appeared on 2 rows here. The reason is on this row, Paul worked on the job, but he got a different rate of pay. He got 23. So as I look through this, I can just submit the report if I'm already comfortable with the data. But this is a little bit odd for somebody to be on the job with a lower rate of pay. So if I want to, I can go back to TradeSeal and try to take a look at why that happened. So it could just be, let's see, electrician. Oh, look at that. I found out why. Paul worked on the job, but with no position. So this could be a typo or it could be intentional. It's gonna depend on why I'm using TradeSeal. But if you want to, you can correct that all the way back in your time system, or you can come into TradeSeal, and if it's a net zero change or not a material difference in how the person gets paid, you could just change that job and you could say, I have a missing position. This, unfortunately, is a very common prevailing wage and certified payroll error, misclassification, or no classification. So TradeSeal has already helped me spot this before I submit the report. If I want to, I could change to the correct classification if it was missing, or I could look further into why this happened. And of course, I could just regenerate my report. There is no charge. You're not going to see any per report fees as a TradeSeal customer. You can make as many reports as you want, whenever you want. So in this tutorial, I'm not going to regenerate. I'm going to actually just call them J, and I'm going to say electrician, journeyman, and I could just change their rate of pay. So those are 2 options for fixing this. One is I could go back and regenerate after catching the mistake. The other is I could just fill this in. It's not ideal, but as long as it's legally what I am paying this person, then it's fine to do it this way. And 42.75. All right, data were not perfect for Paul, but I was able to fix this up. Again, an option is to go back and fix Paul's data. He'd probably show up in 1 row, but this is just an example because you will run into these issues from time to time with any certified payroll report. Okay, so let's look at other employees who worked on this. This is interesting because this employee is union. They were on the same job. So they're going to get, of course, a higher pay scale being union. And what the last thing that I'll notice before I move to the second page of this report, I'll zoom in just a bit more. I've got some zeros. And the reason I have zeros, this is totally normal at this point, is I have not yet configured a pay stub or payroll journal import with TradeSeal. Most basic edition users prove out these data first and then tackle this second, because this gives you time to account for how you classify deductions and pay stub items. So for now, if I wanted to, I could just fill these out It's not fun, but if I really need to submit this report right now, I could just fill out the pay stubs, or I can work with TradeSeal team to ensure that I've mapped my deductions. So that'll be covered later. So I just wanted to reassure that the reason we've left these as zeros in this tutorial is to show all of the data except for pay stub are correct. So finally, I get to the end of my report. Looks like I had so many people. I have a second page actually, but I'm going to get all the way to the end of this report, and I've got the fringe benefit plan, and I have so many employees receiving benefits in this case, and some are union. So it says see addendum. So there's other information you can fill in TradeSeal, such as your official. That's a setting if you want that auto-filled. But before I sign this report, I want to also check the addendum. So we'll go back to our zip file and look at that addendum. And let's expand the columns. And this has shown all fringe benefits for all employees. In this case, we have not yet done employer paid fringe credits. We'll come back to that in a moment. But it looks like for the non-union people, we have no benefits. So they're just paid total prevailing wage, cash in lieu. And for the union employees, they have specific fringe benefits broken out. So these are itemized. When I turn in this report, it's going to be clear. This person was even in a different local. So it's going to be clear exactly how all of their fringe benefits were paid on the report. So that's a complex example. To review this report, I had a first page. I had a difficult employee who I was able to correct using just one option. There's other ways to correct a difficult employee. Union and non-union all showed up as expected. For now, I'm leaving these as zeros, and so I can manually enter them from the pay stub, or later in the process of setting up TradeSeal, I, of course, can get these auto-filled. Last but not least, you will see for some employees, they are paid payment in lieu of fringe benefits. So when you have, it's a better example. This employee is definitely union. So all of those things that we just showed on the addendum, those are totaled payment in lieu of fringe. Fringe benefit credit, excuse me. So this is fringe benefit credit, employer paid benefits. You'll notice that for most of our non-union employees, this is filled in instead, payment in lieu of fringe benefits. So one more thing that we'll do to wrap up this certified payroll example, if I'm curious how that was calculated, I can go back to my rate validation screen in TradeSeal, and I'll see that. So I remember Peter, I think, was a name. Yeah, look at that. So I would expect this person to have cash in lieu of benefits, as I just saw in the report. And then I will go back to the union employee that I remember the easiest. And this person has union pay, $364.60 for the week. So that's a great way to double check why people are receiving the pay that they are receiving. Okay, so we've completed the full process to get through to a certified report. There's one more report I want to cover briefly, which is a union report. I did have a few union employees. This only covers 1 week of work, so I'm not going to get a full monthly total. But if I have unions, I can do a union report as well. So we'll cover union remittance. One of the issues with unions is that they often require monthly reports that don't perfectly align with how you track a payroll month. So TradeSeal lets me pick exact work days. I'm just going to pick all of January. And I'm going to choose Excel because most customers really use this report to get the numbers, and then they are going to enter in various portals, unfortunately, to finish the remittance process. So I'm going to hit generate for these dates. And TradeSeal is going to look at my different union workers in different locals. So before I look at this report, just to review, some of my employees are in IBW, right? So I'm going to have employees that are in, oh, I've got way too many fields here. I'm going to hide those. I'm going to have the IBEW union, right? But others, actually I'll type union, are in a different union, IUOE. And something that can be unfortunately very difficult is just figuring out which person to put on the right union report and get the correct hours, the correct pay, and the correct benefits, of course. So when I generate this union report, already generated. When I generate this report and download it, one of the most useful things I'll see is a full breakout. So I'm going to hit download. My download is complete. Just like the certified payroll report, I got a zip file, a folder. This was really helpful because it gave me my 2 union locals. I have 2 different locals in my example, and it put the correct employees on the correct report. So I will take a look at my IBEW electricians here. And this is the summary I'm going to want to check in terms of total benefit calculations. And then as I remit to different funds, I've got a complete breakout of all payable items. And it's going to depend on your union locals. It's going to depend on your arrangements with different benefit funds. But this will make it really easy to get the right numbers that you need for remittance. So that covers the union reporting process. What's nice about union reporting in TradeSeal and union reporting in general is you typically do not need a pay stub. So when we covered the certified payroll reports, I'll go back to the certified report, we did notice some zeros because we haven't imported pay stubs yet. But in the union report, this is not an issue. So once you're comfortable with your gross data in TradeSeal, you can start using union reports if you do need union reporting. Okay, we've made it through a pretty complete example, a complete tutorial of how to set up jobs, employees, rate and benefit rules for both unions and prevailing wages. We've imported data. We have calculated and reviewed. We've talked about potentially correcting issues. Finally, I want to go through one more common example of employer paid fringe credits versus cash in lieu. So we're going to come back to the concept of prevailing wage, and we're going to consider employees who work on a specific prevailing wage job. And we've got prevailing wage rates and we've got prevailing wage benefits, but these are all job specific. In Basic Edition and TradeSeal, many of our customers have gotten to where they're starting to use employer paid benefits and offset the prevailing wage fringe payable. So instead of paying cash in lieu, where you will be taxed on paying the employee, a lot of our Basic Edition customers are already starting to pay employer paid benefits. In TradeSeal, this is called imported benefits. And currently in my tutorial, I don't have any imported benefits. So we'll talk through how to address that. So let's go back to our employee data. And here is an example of employee data, but we've added a few columns to illustrate fringe credits. Okay, let's expand all columns. So here is an employee named Paul, 100021 is Paul's employee ID. I still have my basic employee information, but now there are some new columns. And you'll see a pattern because some employees have multiple employer paid benefits. It's going to depend on how you set up your benefit plans for employees, and you will most likely want to work with a labor attorney to advise you on how you can and cannot claim credit for these benefits, fringe credits. But in terms of data and the TradeSeal tutorial setting this up, I'm going to name my fringe, and this is probably already being calculated somehow. So I'd like to align my fringe name with the correct payroll informational or memo code, but I might not be asking TradeSeal to calculate this. I just want the data to align as a best practice. Then I'll have an amount. So if you've already figured an hourly amount for this benefit, you can put it in. If not, and I'll be sure to cover this in a moment, there are other formulas for fringe, such as annual divided by 2080, several other ones. They are available in TradeSeal Knowledge Center. So if you have more complex ways of arriving at that hourly amount, TradeSeal can auto-calculate. So for simplicity, I've just written the hourly amount, and the fringe is named health and welfare. In this case, I've got two, 401k, health and welfare, and that one's 178 an hour. So this is a very simple example of how to add employer paid fringe rules. We call them fringe credits to the advanced employee import. So let's keep our eye on this employee, Paul, who's 100021. Okay, so we'll go back to TradeSeal itself, and we're going to re-upload our employees. But this time, we're going to tell TradeSeal to watch out for fringe credit rules. So when importing, we're going to choose the file. It's going to be the advanced employee import. We're going to check files include fringe credits, and we're going to submit. So now let's take a look at that employee. So I have the same employee, but now I have imported benefits match. So I can now see that this employee has employer paid benefits that I'm expecting to offset the prevailing wage fringe. So I've updated this, and the effective date of these changes, it looks like that was set to March of last year. So I'm expecting this to completely update TradeSeal's understanding of Paul. Now, if you intend to give someone credits as of now, right, and you don't want it to apply retroactively, just be sure your date reflects that. So if I don't want these applied till later, I could have changed the date. But in this example, I'm expecting to see them immediately. I basically just told TradeSeal, for reporting purposes, I want you to assume that they had fringe credits from that date. So let's go back to our data and see what happened with this employee, Paul. So what I'm noticing right away is that the other non-union employees who worked on this job, let's simplify 26002. I've got several non-union employees who worked on this job. In fact, if I want to, I can look at only the people receiving prevailing wage cash in lieu by ordering. So this is interesting. When I see a lighter color, that means the employee is receiving less prevailing wage cash in lieu, which is the reason it's lighter color is that I'm paying less tax. So most TradeSeal users see this as a good thing to pay less cash in lieu. This employee is receiving less already because they're highly paid. They just happen to be a highly paid employee, paid above the prevailing wage rate for what they were doing. So I don't have to pay them as much cash in lieu. But returning to the example of Paul, their cash in lieu for this employee went down. So the reason that the cash in lieu is less is that TradeSeal is applying the employer paid fringe credits. It knows that Paul receives approximately 160 an hour for 401k and 178 an hour for health and welfare. And so it's applied those credits and can reduce the cash in lieu accordingly. Last but not least, a common question we get from basic edition customers is, do all of my fringe credits have to be imported as an hourly amount? The question is, do I have to get out my calculator and put this in? No, you don't. So if you're ever curious about fringe credits, go to TradeSeal Knowledge Center and go to the Advanced Employee Import. And it will cover the basics and also show you calculation methods. So some calculations need to be done real time, so to speak. So for example, percent of gross or pay gross would mean calculate this real time. Some customers even use this to put a remainder into a fund instead of cash in lieu. So TradeSeal is capable of supporting that, but most customers account for it in arrears because the contributions have to be irrevocable, meaning you have to prove at some point that you did pay the money. So what a lot of customers are doing is a formula such as divide by 2080, which is a way of saying, hey, TradeSeal, if I give you a divide by 2080 amount, do the math to turn it into an hourly for me. So I won't go in depth on all of the fringe credit calculation methods in this tutorial, but I did want to speak about where to find them in the Knowledge Center. If you have questions, you can always just ask TradeSeal support team or your other TradeSeal contacts questions about which calculation method to use. So let's conclude this tutorial. We've accomplished a lot. We've talked about setting up all data. We've talked about importing files. We've been able to use rate validation in depth to look at our imported hours. We've even set up employer paid fringe credits. We've set up union and non-union employees. A couple final items that I'll comment on. Many ask, when will I get an employee API? Once you have proven your setup for importing employees, an API is the same thing. It's just nicer to use. So to set up an API, I'll want to have API keys from my payroll vendor. So if you're using one of TradeSeal's supported payroll systems, you'll enter your API keys from the vendor. One of the most common processes is to import employees. Mine just says demo, but you'll hit process and it would, for example, go import your employees. So why did I cover files in this tutorial? Because the data are the same. API is a cleaner way to get the data, but there's no point in doing that if your data points do not align. And that goes for fringe credits as well, employee unions, and so on. Another question that we get is, I've done everything right. I'm able to show reports. I'm confident in my calculations. How do I make this part of my payroll? So as I mentioned earlier, many TradeSeal customers in Basic Edition use this as part of the payroll process. They import hours, apply calculations, and import to their payroll system, which will save you a lot of time and improve accuracy. If you wish to do that, you simply need to work with your TradeSeal team on configuration. This is often done by our support team, and it's fairly straightforward. You'll want the payroll export to align with your supported payroll system. So that completes our tutorial of completely setting up TradeSeal Basic Edition. And if you have additional questions, please reach out to your TradeSeal team. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.